Today's Wonder Box is right here in our sanctuary, and I am excited to open it. It has some words on it. It might be kind of hard to see at home, but it says, "Politics are for everyone." I wonder what that means. Before we start to open the box, let's try to understand that word politics. When we use the word politics, what might easily come to mind are the two largest political parties in the United States, Democrats and Republicans. Political parties are ways of organizing ideas about how humans can work together to form and run governments. Politics is about something much broader than two political parties in one nation. The word in English comes from the Greek word politika, which means affairs of the city. Politics is about how people come together and organize themselves in the world. Political actions are the decisions people make that organize how we care for our families, our neighbors, and our planet. Our fifth and sixth principles as Unitarian Universalists encourage us to take political actions that look out for our own well-being and the well-being of other people at the same time. They guide us to exercise our voice and power in democracy and to take action for a peaceful and just world community. Today's service is all about political actions to respond to climate change. Sometimes individuals take political actions, and sometimes groups of people take political action. A political action one individual could take in response to climate change might be to vote for a candidate in a local election who supports a rebate program to install solar panels on our homes at a very low cost, because that would reduce dependency on carbon-based fuels like coal and gas and serve to slow down global warming. Maybe that person might put a sign on their lawn or window advertising their support for a certain candidate. That's a political action. In September of 2018, a high school student in Sweden decided to take political action in her community in response to climate change. It inspired a group of people to join her and sparked an international environmental movement. At 15 years old, Greta Thunberg decided to go on strike from attending school because she was scared and angry that Swedish politicians were not taking enough action fast enough to address climate change. Going on strike meant that instead of going to school each day for 3 weeks, Greta Thunberg sat in front of the Swedish parliament. Thunberg's action, sitting alone on those steps the very first day and then sharing her actions on social media, inspired other young activists to go on strike too. First in Sweden, then around the world. This is collective political action. Thunberg's action began a youth-led and organized political action movement called Fridays for the Future. 3 years later, 14 million people in 7,500 cities have gone on strike. Many young people started gathering every Friday for a climate strike. There is strength in numbers. Their message? We will strike because the time to address climate change with fully funded solutions proposed by scientists, not half measures proposed by corporations or politicians, that time is not next year. It is not next month. It is not even tomorrow. It is today.
One of the first times I heard about the Sunrise Movement was in November 2018, when 51 young people were arrested after holding a sit-in in Nancy Pelosi's office as they called for action to take on the climate crisis. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez joined them just a couple of weeks after having been elected to Congress, which, quote, helped launch the Green New Deal into the national spotlight, according to their website. They are leading the fight, helping to change the narrative, pushing politicians and inspiring people, inspiring me, as they try to secure the future for us all. Here are two readings from Varshini Prakash, the co-founder and executive director of the Sunrise Movement. The first, so many young people around the country and the world have grown up seeing our political system failing us. For twice as long as I've been alive on this planet, we have known about the climate crisis. And for just as long, the wealthy and powerful have knowingly profited off pollution, lied about the science, choked our democracy with their dollars, and stolen our futures. Our generation is living at this crossroads of life or death. The second, we are not the first generation to witness environmental disaster, but we are the last with the power to stop its cataclysmic force. We haven't caused this problem, nor do we know how our future will unfold. Yet, we are choosing responsibility and action. We are choosing each other over isolation, fear, and retreat. It's a scary thing, but it's all the more possible when we do it together.
Today's service about climate justice came about through an invitation to collective political action. The statewide social action group, Unitarian Universalist Action New Hampshire, reached out to congregations like ours around the state, asking us to lend our support to an international action happening this weekend called Faiths for Climate Justice. There is strength in numbers. Faiths for Climate Justice is a program of the interfaith organization Green Faith. Faiths for Climate Justice seeks to rally people around the world this weekend to worship in temples, synagogues, mosques, and churches, to use political action to make it clear that our religious values and theirs guide us to work for a world no longer dependent on fossil fuels, a world where the unfolding climate catastrophe is countered by international economic and social policies that limit the warming of our atmospheres to 1.5 degrees Celsius in this century. Why this weekend? Well, in just a few weeks, on November 1st, leaders of the world nations will gather in Glasgow, Scotland, for the United Nations Climate Change Conference, including the United States President Joe Biden. The conference will set goals for the next decade of international political and economic action meant to reduce global warming. Scientists understand that this next decade of action or inaction are crucial to determining the next 50 years of climate change. Will our international leaders have the courage to take bold, swift action to move us off a carbon-based economy? Faiths for Climate Justice seeks to apply public pressure to these leaders. It seeks to apply a moral and ethical frame to these issues, that creating policies that favor climate-polluting corporations' short-term profits ahead of the predicted long-term losses of homes, farmlands, and lives around the world is wrong. Our values tell us so, our religions teach us so, and our faiths call us to take individual and collective political action to hold our leaders accountable to protect human life and human livelihoods for the many over the short-term profits of the few. Tomorrow, there will be a Faiths for Climate Justice rally at Manchester City Hall at 3 p.m. Like Greta Thunberg on the steps of the Swedish Parliament, people of faith in New Hampshire will gather. There is strength in numbers. To let President Biden and other world leaders know that we hold them accountable, to take bold economic action to limit the amount of carbon produced in the next decade. To do anything less will mean a continued ramping up of the extreme weather that we've witnessed around the globe this summer. A difficult truth is that we are running out of time to move off carbon and transition world economies to renewable energy sources like biofuels, solar, wind, and geothermal power. A difficult truth is that 3 decades of political and economic half measures in response to climate change mean that the window to completely prevent climate change-related catastrophes has already closed. Andy shared a reading earlier from Varshini Prakash, the American co-leader of the Sunrise Movement, whose family is from India. She often begins her speeches and reflections with these words. When I first learned about the climate crisis as a kid, I would lie awake late into the night, heart pounding, imagining what it would mean for me and people who looked like me around the world. I couldn't get this image out of my head of what people would do to each other when they were faced with no food or water, with cages and guns when they sought sanctuary in other countries. I felt alone, small, powerless. Another difficult truth is that climate change is inextricably linked to racial justice, to immigrant justice. Climate change is an accelerant to existing social ills that separate and divide people. In the face of all these difficult truths, Varshini's words really capture me because there are so many times that I feel small and powerless when it comes to climate change. Powerless in my fear and sorrow about climate disasters, like the ones that have ravaged our world this summer. Just clicking on the news feed or looking at the headlines, deadly heat waves across Europe, massive flooding in Asia, wildfires and Category 4 hurricanes in North America. I feel powerless and furious trying to come up with any meaningful political action that I could take when my actions are up against the pocketbooks of corporations who have funded junk science and lobbied successfully to have their interests protected by laws instead of the public interest. The poet Adrienne Rich writes, "My heart is moved by all I cannot save. So much has been destroyed. I have to cast my lot with those who age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world." Rich's poem gives me permission to acknowledge my powerlessness as an individual, to accept it. She tells us, I have to cast my lot with those who age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world. In fact, she proposes that there is a spiritual wisdom in acknowledging our powerlessness. When we surrender to how small our impact can be as an individual, we become more open to collective action. When we release the mindsets we've been taught, every man for himself, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, we can embrace new ones, like my liberation is bound up in yours, or together we rise. Acknowledging our feelings of powerlessness might be a necessary step, perhaps an uncomfortable step, to moving out of despair and preparing ourselves to take collective action with others. Varshini says that being part of the Sunrise Movement buoys her. She no longer lies awake at night consumed by anxiety about climate change because she is taking political action. We are in the world to change the world. Our UU values call us to collective action, to live out our values of interdependence and respect for human dignity, to act with justice, equity, and compassion and the goal of world community. Our UU values call on us to notice, name, and fight acts of greed, selfishness, and cruelty. We can seek inspiration from the Fridays for the Future young people who are willing to interrupt their studies to sound the alarm that urgent climate action is needed from political leaders. We can seek inspiration from the Sunrise Movement. Leaders in the Sunrise Movement, originators of the Green New Deal legislative agenda that ties a shift in climate change policy to policies that stabilize the economic positions of poor, working class, and middle class folks. Some of these proposals are being considered right now in the major infrastructure bill passing through the US Congress. We can seek inspiration from the young people here at the UU Church of Nashua, who helped create this banner for the Faiths for Climate Justice rally. We'll bring this banner to the rally tomorrow at Manchester City Hall, and we'll share photos of it with the International Faiths for Climate Justice organizers to make sure that this message, our message, from right here in New Hampshire, in our church, in our city, gets to international leaders, to let them know that we care about the decisions that will be made at the United Nations Climate Change Conference in November. If you're able, please join us tomorrow at Manchester City Hall. And if you can't, I hope you will leave this service curious about collective political actions that you can take to address climate change here in our state. Perhaps by joining in the UU Action New Hampshire Climate Group, or becoming active with an organization like 350 New Hampshire, or working with the No Coal, No Gas organizers taking action to close the coal plant in Bow, New Hampshire. And let's keep on taking those individual actions to learn about and to respond to climate change. While we were making this banner at the Outdoor Faith Formation Family Hour on the first Saturday in October, I spoke with young people at our church about what they've been learning about climate change. All of them told me that society needs to make choices that keep carbon out of the atmosphere, which is why trees are so prominent in this banner. Trees use carbon and store it for photosynthesis, which in turn reduces the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. One of our young people imagined that scientists one day could develop technologies to help trees do this more efficiently, allowing us to scrub out the carbon dioxide that is built up in the atmosphere. Where there is imagination, there is hope. When there are people coming together for dialogue, there is potential. With imagination and potential, may our world leaders hear our voice among the millions speaking up, rallying for climate change. Together, our powerlessness falls away. Together, we are powerful. May it be so.